Let me tell you a story that feels almost too wild to be true. But it is. It's a tale full of twists, courage, and a spark of rebellion. And it all begins in a corner of West Africa that the world rarely talks about, Burkina Faso. But wait, before we jump in, imagine this for a second. You've made it. Not just got a job made it. We're talking sleek sports cars in the driveway, a big shiny house in a fancy part of town, money in the bank, and vacations that look like dream ads. You're living the kind of life people only see in movies. Now picture walking away from all that. On purpose. Sounds nuts, right? Well, that's exactly what's happening right now. Not in the movies, in real life, and not just with one or two people. There's a quiet wave of millionaires, yes, actual millionaires, who are packing up their lives in Europe, in the US, in Dubai, and they're heading back to a place many people try to leave. They're going back to Burkina Faso. So what's going on? Why would anyone trade comfort, convenience, and luxury for a place often called one of the poorest countries on earth? Burkina Faso. It's a land of red earth, vibrant culture, and powerful history. But let's be honest, it's not on most people's radar. For years, it's been labelled with all the clichés. Landlocked, underdeveloped, resource-rich, but poor. The kind of place people read about in aid reports, not in investment portfolios. For decades, the story was simple. If you were smart, talented, and ambitious, you left. You went to Paris, or Montreal, or maybe New York. You sent money back home, visited during holidays, and reminded your kids where their roots were. But that's not the story anymore. Something changed. And the spark that lit this transformation? His name is Captain Ibrahim Traore. When Captain Traore took over as leader of Burkina Faso, most global leaders yawned. Just another military man, they thought. Same old, same old. But Captain Traore didn't follow the script. One of the first things he did? He turned down money. Not just any money, big loans from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The kind of loans countries like Burkina Faso had depended on for decades. That move was like flipping over the table in a high-stakes poker game. People were stunned. Was he crazy? Was he brave? Or maybe, just maybe, he saw something everyone else missed? Because here's the truth no one talks about. Those big loans always came with strings. Strings that tied countries to endless repayments, policies they didn't choose, and the quiet erosion of control. Traore cut those strings. And by doing that, he sent a message. Burkina Faso is ready to write its own story. This message echoed far beyond Burkina Faso. It reached the ears of those who had left, the doctors, the engineers, the business tycoons who had built empires abroad. And something began to stir. For years, they had been outsiders, foreigners. No matter how successful they were, there was always a ceiling. Always that feeling of being just a guest. But now their homeland was calling. Not as a charity case, not as a memory, but as a place full of possibility. They saw a blank canvas. They saw opportunity. And one by one, they started to come back. Not just to visit, to invest, to build, to stay. For decades, Africa has suffered from something called brain drain. That's when the best and brightest leave, taking their talents somewhere else. But now, Burkina Faso is flipping the script. Instead of brain drain, we're seeing brain gain. And not just brains, but heart and soul too. People coming back not just with degrees, but with dreams. Not just with experience, but with a mission. They're building roads, not just literal ones, but pathways to opportunity. And guess what? Young people are watching. Kids in villages who once dreamed of leaving, now dream of leading. If this story moves you even a little, if it makes you think, gives you hope, or just opens your eyes to something you never knew before, then do us a small favour with a huge impact. Hit that like button so this message reaches more people. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the New Tourist channel so you never miss another story like this. And if you believe in building something bigger, if you want to be part of a community that values truth, power, and progress in Africa, then consider joining our membership community. Your support isn't just for us. It's how we keep telling African stories that matter. Now let's pause for a second. You're the leader of a struggling country. The lights flicker, roads crack, people are tired. Your best and brightest are leaving, chasing better lives somewhere else. The experts, those guys in suits from faraway cities, hand you a playbook. Just follow the plan, they say. Take the loan. Do as we say. We've done this before. But what if you close the playbook, push it aside and say, no thanks, we've got our own plan? Crazy? Maybe. Bold? Definitely. And that's exactly what Captain Ibrahim Traore did in Burkina Faso. At a time when everyone expected him to play it safe, he did the opposite. He tore up the usual script and started writing his own. Let's talk about gold. Burkina Faso is dripping in it, literally. The country is one of the top gold producers in Africa. But for decades, this gold story was kind of tragic. Picture this: trucks hauling raw gold out of the ground straight into foreign hands, refined abroad, sold abroad. Profits also abroad, at home. The people who lived on that golden soil saw barely a glimmer. Now imagine you're watching that year after year. Your country rich in gold yet poor in life. Wouldn't that sting? Well, Traoré decided enough was enough. He put his foot down and made a small but powerful move. We're going to process our gold here, in our own country, by our own people. Sounds obvious, right? But here's the thing. It almost never happens. Across Africa, raw resources are still shipped out and sold by someone else. Burkina Faso decided to break that cycle, and just like that, a new mindset started taking shape. We are not just exporters of raw materials, we are builders of value. But Traoré didn't stop at gold. Once you've decided to take control of your resources, the next question is, what do you do with the value you keep? That's where it gets exciting. Traoré's team rolled out massive infrastructure projects, not just roads for the sake of roads, but real, strategic groundwork. New highways connecting farming zones to cities, reliable electricity to power factories, urban renewal in places that had been forgotten for years. But hold on, it gets better. These projects weren't random. They weren't about shiny ribbon-cutting ceremonies or photo ops. No, they were part of a bigger plan, a plan to call home those who once left. Imagine you're a successful Burkinabe living abroad. You left because there was nothing for you at home, no opportunity, no support. But now things are changing. The roads are smoother, the lights are on, the red tape is being cut down. And then, just as you start to notice, something else happens. It was a heartfelt message, broadcast not just through words but through action. Come home, help us build, not because we're begging, but because we finally have the tools. And that call, it landed differently, because this time it wasn't about guilt or pity. It wasn't some sad story of a country on its knees. It was a proud invitation. Let's build something we can all be proud of. And guess what? People listened. Doctors in Canada, engineers in Germany, fashion designers in France, tech founders in the UK. All of them began packing their bags, booking one-way tickets, and planting new roots back in the land they once left behind. Not for vacation, not for show, but for good. You might be thinking, wait a second, haven't we heard this before? African leaders have long begged their diasporas to return. Come home, invest, help us. And most of the time, crickets. So why is Burkina Faso different? Why is this call working when so many others have failed? Well, let's break it down. First, there were the obvious things. Tax breaks for returning investors, simpler business registration, fast-tracked permits. All the paperwork nightmares? Slashed. Then there was a bold move. Any foreign company doing business in Burkina Faso, they had to set up a headquarters inside the country. No more operating from cushy offices abroad. Be here. Create jobs here. This created a real ecosystem, an environment where returning entrepreneurs weren't isolated. They plugged right into a growing network of local businesses, investors, and support. But beyond all that, the real magic wasn't in policies, it was in purpose. What's happening now in Burkina Faso is like a perfect storm. On one side, you have pull, everything we just talked about. Opportunities, pride, purpose. On the other side, there's the push. All around the world, African professionals are hitting ceilings. They're dealing with discrimination. They're tired of being labelled diverse hires or being told they're impressive for someone from Africa. They're looking around and asking, why am I building someone else's dream? That frustration, that quiet fire, it met the spark coming from Burkina Faso. And when push met pull, it turned into momentum. Let's be clear, this isn't about turning Burkina Faso into Paris or New York. It's not about copying what the West has done. It's about creating something new, something rooted in identity, in history, in legacy. Because legacy, that's what really drives people. You can't pass down a fancy job title, you can't pass down a salary, but you can pass down land, a business, a story your grandchildren will tell. Burkinabe around the world are coming home because they finally see that their country is building something worth passing on. And suddenly being part of that story, it means more than anything money can buy. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about Burkina Faso anymore. Something is spreading. The neighbours are watching. Other African nations are taking notes. The idea that Africa must rely on outsiders is cracking. So what happens when a generation decides to stop asking for help and starts building instead? Well, we're about to find out. Now let me ask you something personal. Let's say you've cracked the code of success. You've got a thriving business in London. Maybe you're leading a tech firm in Toronto, or you're running a healthcare startup in Atlanta. You've made it. Your kids go to the best schools. Your neighbours smile politely. Life is comfortable. But one morning, over coffee, you catch your reflection in the mirror and realise something's missing. It's not money. It's not fame. It's not even peace. It's belonging. Because no matter how many degrees hang on your wall or how many zeros appear in your account, something in your heart whispers, you built all this. But where do you really belong? And that's when the idea creeps in, slow at first, then louder each day. What if I took everything I've learned out here and brought it home? What if I stopped just earning and started building something that could outlive me? Think about it. Making another million in a foreign land might fatten your wallet, but building a solar plant back home, launching a textile factory that trains young tailors, planting a business that turns cassava into high-end export flour. That's not just wealth, that's legacy. And for a growing number of Burkinabe living abroad, that question is no longer just an idea, it's a mission. Here's what most people don't see behind those success stories abroad. The invisible walls. You're a top-tier software developer, but somehow you're always the diversity hire. You're a doctor with 2 specialties, yet patients still assume you're the nurse. The promotions never seem to come as easily. Your kids learn to pronounce their names the way their teachers can handle it. And holidays? You explain the same jokes again and again. Little things, but they stack up. It's not always ugly. It's not always loud. But it's there. That feeling of being accepted, but not fully embraced. Respected, but never quite rooted. And that's what makes the idea of returning home so powerful. Because back home, you're not someone's African friend. You're the boss. You're the founder. You're the one building schools, setting trends and employing people whose parents knew your parents. You're not the other. You're you, in full colour. Now let's rewind for a second and look at what's actually happening on the ground in Burkina Faso. The return of the diaspora isn't just about sentiment. It's being powered by a government that understands the power of people who left and are now ready to give back. But instead of asking for handouts or charity, this new vision is about partnership. Ibrahim Traore and his team knew that if they wanted their brightest minds to come back, they needed to roll out the red carpet, not with applause, but with opportunity. So they did something clever. They made it easier to build in Burkina Faso than ever before. Tax holidays for returning entrepreneurs, fast-tracked business registration, legal support, grants, public-private partnerships. And here's the kicker: transparency and accountability. Traore also required that foreign businesses operating in the country open actual offices on Burkinabe soil. No more ghost operations. No more mining the land and wiring profits offshore. This one move triggered a ripple effect. Suddenly, a business ecosystem started forming, rich in collaboration, local presence, and anchored networks. Now, when diaspora return, they're not stepping into chaos, they're plugging into a system that's ready for them. Now let's get to something even deeper, something that can't be measured in spreadsheets or balance sheets. It's called healing. In January 2025, President Traore signed a historic executive order. It wasn't about roads or gold, it was about people. It granted Burkinabe citizenship to the descendants of enslaved Africans, men, women and children who'd been taken from their homeland centuries ago during the brutal transatlantic slave trade. Let that sink in. Descendants of those whose names were stripped, whose lands were stolen, whose stories were scattered across the Americas, Europe and the Caribbean, were now being welcomed back home, not just with open arms, but with a passport, with rights, with recognition. This wasn't symbolic, it was revolutionary. Because for generations, African countries have spoken about Pan-Africanism. But Burkina Faso decided to act on it. And just like that, the return wasn't just for those who had left in the last 50 years. It was for those who were torn away 500 years ago. Across the world, millions of people with African ancestry have grown up knowing they're from Africa, but not knowing where. DNA tests gave them percentages, 20% this, 40% that. But that's not identity, that's data. Burkina Faso offered them something different. Home. Not in the tourist sense. Not, come take a photo and buy a kente scarf. But home in the legal, cultural, and emotional sense. For many African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, and Afro-Latinos, this was a thunderclap moment. A once vague connection to a continent became a living bridge. They weren't just visitors, they could be citizens. The decade of return wasn't just a slogan, it was a welcome mat rolled out across the Atlantic. And while other countries watched, Traore's government led. Now you might be reading all this and thinking, that's a nice story. But is it really that big a deal? Here's why it is. Because for the first time in modern history, a low-income African country is rewriting the rules of development without waiting for permission. No more dependency on foreign aid. No more relying on Western consultants to decide what's best. No more selling raw materials for peanuts and buying back the finished products at 10 times the price. Burkina Faso is building its own industries, using its own resources, empowering its own people, and calling its children home, whether they left 5 years ago or 5 centuries ago. And those children, they're responding. They're bringing not just money, but vision, networks, creativity, determination, skills forged in places where competition is cutthroat. And the most important thing they bring? Hope. What's happening in Burkina Faso isn't flashy. It's not making headlines in the Wall Street Journal or CNN. But maybe that's why it's working. While the world watches wars, elections, and economic meltdowns, something quiet but powerful is taking shape in West Africa. A country once counted out is now setting the tone. And other nations are paying attention. Because if Burkina Faso can pull this off, with its challenges, limited resources, and complex history, what's stopping others? What if Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, or the DRC said, wait, maybe we don't need to wait for aid. Maybe we already have what we need, our people, our land, and our will. Could this be the beginning of something bigger, a continental shift? A new age of African development, powered not by outsiders but by sons and daughters who never forgot where they came from. Let's just say this, the winds are changing, the drums are beating, and Africa's long-lost children are finally coming home. So here we are, at the edge of something extraordinary. A quiet revolution is unfolding, not with fanfare or breaking news banners, but through the steady footsteps of returnees, the hum of new factories, and the rising spirit of a nation that said, we will rise on our own terms. Burkina Faso isn't just rewriting its future, It's offering a mirror to the entire African continent and to every person in the diaspora wondering where they truly belong. This isn't just a story about one country. It's about all of us, about remembering who we are, reclaiming what was lost, and rebuilding what was broken. And if you felt anything watching this, pride, curiosity, maybe even a little fire in your chest, then don't let that feeling disappear. Subscribe to The New Tourist right now, because this isn't the last story like this we're telling. Not by a long shot. Like this video so the algorithms don't bury a story the world needs to hear. Share it with your family, your friends, and your group chats. Be the reason someone else learns the truth. And if you want to go even deeper, if you want behind-the-scenes stories, early access, exclusive discussions, join our membership community. Because this isn't just a channel anymore, it's a movement. And the story we're writing together, it's only just beginning. Vi